Hello lovely people, long time no chat. I literally haven't filmed a video in probably about a year. It's been so long. I talk about books a lot still on my Instagram account, but I don't really get the chance to talk in much depth about them over there, so I've just been really craving it. I'm really craving just talking at length about the books that I've read. These glasses are mirroring the light, which is kind of annoying me, so I'm going to take them off. Today's video is going to be mostly focused on dystopian books because that's been my area of interest recently. I go through phases with books. I get really into something and then I'll just read it like all the time and then I'll go off it. Recently it's been dystopian books. I've just been so into them. I've collected 5 of my favourites that I've read recently, and yeah, let's get into the video. So the first book I want to talk about is Wool by Hugh Howey. This has recently been made into a series on Apple TV, which is also really, really good. I highly recommend that once you've read the books. So this is the first book in a trilogy, and the trilogy is called the Silo trilogy. I have only read the first book, so disclaimer that I can't review the other two, but based on this one, I will definitely be picking them up soon. Yeah, it's so gripping, so I really want to know what happens. The plot of this is that basically it's a post-apocalyptic Earth. Humanity has died out, but the last remaining people on Earth live in an underground silo. The landscape outside is just completely like toxic. It's a toxic wasteland. And so they all live in this underground silo. And on the top of the silo, there are these cameras that look out to the world outside. They project onto screens inside the silo, so all the people inside the silo can see. It's as if they're looking out of a window, but it's actually just screens projecting what the cameras are showing above, if that makes sense. It's just completely like a barren landscape. The lenses get like dirty because of all the dust from the outside land. So the society inside the silo is really controlled. There are quite a lot of rules that you have to obey, and if you break any of the rules, then you're sent outside into the toxic wasteland. But you're not sent outside just like as is to just die straight away. You're sent out in a protective suit to keep you alive for long enough so that you can clean the sensors. Every time somebody is sent out for cleaning, everybody inside the silo can then see the view clear. Everybody inside the silo basically just watches you die. It's an interesting concept, kind of questioning the people inside are like shown this version of reality of the outside world, but is it actually like that because they're just seeing it through camera lenses? It comes to light that it's quite a corrupt society and the truth isn't maybe what it seems. There's a lot of mystery. It's really gripping because you just want to know what the reality is. This was originally self-published on Kindle, which is pretty cool, and it's now published by Penguin, and obviously it's been made into a TV series, so I think that's really cool, like when self-published authors become really big. His writing is really good. He managed to capture like the kind of like suffocating claustrophobic feel of being in an underground silo really well. You can really picture it. You feel like you're there. You feel like you know what it would be like to be in that society. You're not only just underground, you also have always had these rules and restrictions placed on you, but you don't fully know what the truth is and you're not allowed to ask. It's quite evocative writing, I would say. Our protagonist in the book is like this really strong female character, which I love. The one thing I would say I didn't like about it is the romance aspect. I enjoyed it in a way because it kind of added an extra element to the story, but I also at the same time kind of felt like it was unnecessary. Like the main character is a cool girl, she's capable and she's strong, and I feel like the guy that she ends up having this love interest with, I just feel like he's a bit nothingy. His character isn't really that developed. He doesn't really know where he stands morally. I found it kind of unconvincing. But at the same time, it didn't bother me that much because it's not like a massive part of the story. It does make sense for the plot. It feels like it is just a plot device to kind of keep things moving, and it would have been nicer if maybe some more thought had been put into that. But I also haven't read the next few books, so I don't know if that develops actual dystopian side, the mystery around like what's going on in this silo, the atmosphere. I really liked. I do highly recommend this. And I recommend the TV show as well. So the next book I want to talk about is actually a YA young adult book, and that is Scythe by Neal Schusterman. This is kind of like Hunger Games in that it's a YA book, but it can be enjoyed by anyone of any age. It's really well written, really good concept. It's like a post-mortality society. So basically like technology medicine and whatnot has advanced so much that all knowledge has been acquired about anything and everything. That all sits in this thing called the Thunderhead, which is like the internet basically, this entity that knows everything. And so as a result, natural death just doesn't happen. And so people just can live forever and ever and ever. The way that they kind of like control things, like obviously like population control and things, is by choosing certain members of society to be professional scythes, so like killers. They're basically like the executioners of society, and they go and choose people to kill. They call killing gleaning. So the story follows these two teenagers who end up showcasing certain qualities that mean they get elected to be apprentices, eventually become scythes. The guy that takes them on as his apprentices is actually only really allowed one apprentice, but he takes on two. The way that they get around that in this like big court thing of all the scythes is that they decide that one of the apprentices will have to glean the other one eventually. So one of them will have to kill the other one in order to progress to be professional scythes. I won't really go into it more than that because otherwise I'll just give away the entire book. The thing I really liked about this is that it doesn't feel like it's rushing anything. It's not like crazy action packed. I quite like that because it makes you feel like you're kind of in the world. I can really imagine being a member of society in this world, and that's quite an important part for me when I'm reading like a dystopian book. Some people might say it's quite slow paced, but I enjoyed that because it makes me feel like I'm actually there and actually can understand what the world is like, and it means you kind of get to explore it a little bit. I really liked the kind of dynamic between the two main characters, and that kind of question of like what's going to happen kept me reading. Yeah, it's only the first one in, I think it's a trilogy or a series, I'm not sure. I need to read the other ones, but I really enjoyed this. One of the main reasons why I love dystopian books is because they present lots of different moral challenges. That kind of thing of like, oh, what if the world was like this? How would we behave? What would you do if things were this way? And this book, I think, is a really interesting exploration of that. It really makes you think, what would I actually do if dying just didn't exist and everybody can just go around not being scared of death? And then you've got this group of people who are the only ones who have that kind of power, and then that gets corrupt. It's a really interesting concept, and I think it's executed really well. Executed. Okay, so this one, I'm not entirely sure if it really fits into the genre of dystopian, but I'm going to say it is because it talks about different versions of the world. But it is Sayaka Murata's Life Ceremony, which is a collection of short stories. You can see how much I loved it by how many tabs are in it. I think there's 12 short stories in this one. They basically just describe really strange other versions of the world. Like I was just saying about that kind of thing of like, oh, imagine if things were like this. It's like she's taken that and just done 12 really weird stories. I actually have a signed copy as well, which really makes me excited. My beautiful friend Abby kindly got this for me last year for my birthday. So thank you, Abby, I love you. This is one of my favourite books of all time. I think personally, I think Sayaka Murata is an absolute genius. If I could just open up someone's brain and just take a look in there at their thoughts, I would choose her brain because she just makes me think about things that I just never would have thought about before. I would just be so fascinated to see how she looks at the world because her perspective is just so interesting to me. She also has this really dry humour to her writing, which I really enjoy. The two books I also really liked are Convenience Store Women and Earthlings. Convenience Store Women is like kind of quirky, dry, a bit weird but not like fucked up. Earthlings is like, I think it's going to be kind of cute because the cover looks kind of cute. It's got a little hedgehog thing on it. But this is like one of the heaviest, weirdest, most messed up books I've ever read. I'll go through a few of the stories just to give you like an idea of what sort of things she explores. The first short story is called A First-Rate Material, and it's about a society where human parts, basically just dead bodies, are repurposed and made into furniture and clothing. It's really interesting because it's like the people who have furniture made out of human bone or like a jumper made out of human hair, it's treated as if how like cashmere and things like that are like, oh, a luxury material. It's the same kind of thing. It's like, oh, a luxury human hair jumper. The premise of it is that this woman is getting married. The fiance doesn't like all of this like human body furniture and clothing and stuff, and so she's like having a dilemma about it with her friends because she's like, why doesn't he like it? Like, it's fashionable. That's what she starts with. And so immediately you're like, okay, this is a bit weird. And then she just kind of escalates things. Around the middle of the book, she has her actual life ceremony short story. That's the one you need to make sure that you're not reading it in a public place where someone can like look over your shoulder. It's so messed up, but so interesting at the same time. It explores things like traditions and cultural norms and taboos and things like that, and kind of puts it all out on the table. So yeah, there's one where a character has a different persona for every community she exists in, so she just creates different versions of herself. There's one where there's 2 schoolgirls and they keep this grown man as a pet. There's one where there's like a relationship and then the bedroom curtain somehow gets involved with 2 humans. Just a fascinating book. If you like weird stories, if you aren't afraid to read something that might make you a bit uncomfortable, highly recommend that one if you're into weird stuff like moi. Okay, the next one is one that I have spoken about on here before, and that is Tender is the Flesh. So this is like a mixture of, I'd say, dystopian, but also kind of like horror as well. It's a dystopian society where all meat, like animal meat, has become infected by this virus, and so nobody can eat it. Instead, they repurpose all the slaughterhouses to process human meat instead of animal meat. Cannibalism just becomes legalized. Refer to them as heads rather than actual like humans, because they see them as kind of like almost like a different species to them. It was the government that initiated this transition, they called it, for everybody to just go and start eating human meat instead of animal meat. The narrator works at one of these slaughterhouses. He ends up getting like gifted this human, a female specimen. He doesn't know what to do with her because I don't think he eats human meat, and so he kind of just like ties her up outside his house and doesn't really know what to do with her. As you kind of follow him through the story, you also learn more about his past, his traumas, things that he's struggling with, because he's struggling with a lot of stuff. All kind of like just comes to a head, and he makes some interesting decisions, let's say. The perspective is really kind of detached. You think the whole way through he is kind of like disgusted by the entire thing, but at the same time, like, it's kind of hard to tell. I mean, you'll find out at the end what his views really are, I think. Still not really like spelled out to you. And I can't tell how much of that is that it's translated from Spanish. Apparently, I heard somebody told me that in Spanish it kind of reads completely differently, whereas in English it feels quite like blunt and cold and yeah, like quite distant, which I actually really liked, because I think it worked really well with the entire vibe of the book, and it kind of leaves you questioning, like, how does he actually feel about all of this? It also is really unsettling because you read horrible graphic stuff and it's just said in this really matter-of-fact way. I read it like through squinted eyes at some points because I was like, oh, so gross, but really compelling. Like, I couldn't put it down. But it's not for the faint-hearted. Like, I wouldn't say it's like gruesome in a violent way necessarily, but it goes into a lot of detail about the killing or processing of the meat, almost as if you're reading about like an abattoir, but it's humans. It does really make you think about kind of things like agriculture and veganism and the morality of eating meat, and how different is it really between humans and animals. The ending of the book is one of those endings that you are left like, what the hell? Right at the end, the last few lines even, I was just like mind blown by the ending. Did not see it coming at all. Highly recommend this if you want a kind of like thought-provoking dystopian book that is quite gory, but you're not too bothered about that. This one is a really good shout. And last but not least is one that I read very recently, and it's an absolute new firm favourite of mine. Love this book, and that is I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman. This was written, I think, in 1995, which really surprised me because it feels like it was written today. I know that 1995 wasn't actually that long ago, but I don't feel like there are that many books like this that were written back then. I feel like it's quite a brave book. So 39 women are kept imprisoned in a cage underground, and they have these soldiers that walk past and they patrol and they keep an eye on them, and they're observing them basically at all times. They never speak to them, they never look at them, just constantly patrolling. Some of them have like a vague memory of a life before, but none of them can remember how they got into this cage. So there's also a young girl who is the 40th prisoner. She is the narrator of this book. Sits alone in a corner of the cage, consumed by her own thoughts, and she's the only child in the cage. The rest of them are all like full-grown women. So she is the only one who has absolutely no memory of a life before because she never lived one. She was a baby when she entered the cage. So she has only ever experienced imprisonment. So she doesn't understand a lot of the things that the other women talk about to do with relationships and other things in the outside world. Like, she has no frame of reference for it. So she's completely isolated. They also aren't allowed to touch each other. So she's literally lived a life of like no physical intimacy and like barely any emotional intimacy. And so she begins to get really resentful. She's got a lot of anger. I don't want to go into too much detail, but basically, eventually things change. The situation changes. I don't want to tell you what happens, but the situation does change at a certain point. It ends up being that this girl, her unique perspective on life due to like her unique kind of upbringing and the way she has lived, ends up being the kind of key to all the rest of the women's survival. It's such a good book. I don't want to give stuff away, but at the same time it's really hard to talk about it without giving it away. It covers so many different themes. Community, dignity, self-love as well, like, is such a huge thing in the book. Obviously womanhood, because they're all women, and it's really fascinating to just kind of imagine a world where there is just women and what that would look like. It's a really lovely exploration of kind of that like female connection. Throughout the whole book there's this underlying feeling of, for me it was like an anxious feeling of like wanting to know why the situation is the way it is, the reasons why they're there and all of that. The end of the book, I was left feeling empty, kind of despairing of everything, and really, really sad. Like, I'd just been like gutted. I literally read this in one sitting. Afterwards I was just like I just felt so like drained, as if someone had just sucked everything out of me. I don't want to tell you what the ending is, but a lot of people say that the ending is really sad. Although it did make me feel sad, I don't know that it's necessarily like a sad ending. I spoke about this a bit in my review of the book on Instagram, but I felt like it left me actually feeling kind of comforted in that it feels kind of like there's this race to find out the reason for why things are the way they are, and actually you don't necessarily need to know. That doesn't really need to be the reason for existence. The most important part of life is the connections that we have with other people and the relationships that we build. That's what you're left with in the end. The pursuit of knowledge doesn't necessarily need to be the priority. You don't need to be constantly feeling like this massive, immense pressure to know why things are the way they are, because at the end of the day, that's not really that important. And actually what's important is that you've been a good person, that you've connected with other people throughout your life, and that you've contributed to other people's lives. I feel like this book just sums that up kind of in a really, really beautiful way. Yeah, that's the feeling that I was left with. It was quite a philosophical, like existential feeling. It got me thinking about life and the meaning of life and what I want from my life, and actually like made me feel kind of a bit more chilled out in a weird way, because I was like, actually, you know what? The most important thing is having connected with other people in my life. I really, really liked the main character's perspective. I found she's got this really introspective tone. It made me kind of feel like I was with her. She spends a lot of time in solitude, so it makes you feel like you're kind of there in her brain. Really, really beautiful book, and I highly recommend everybody to read it. It's one of those must-read books in my opinion. Thank you so much for coming and watching this video. I really, really appreciate it. Let me know in the comments if you have any other dystopian recommendations, and let me know if you've read any of the books that I have been through as well. I'd be very intrigued to hear if you have differing opinions, similar opinions. Catch you in the next one, hopefully very soon. I'm planning on making lots more content on here. Love you, bye!